Hi, thanks for coming today. This is Dee Dee Myers, and I'm here with Peter Myers, and we're going to talk about board succession planning. We have some hot new data that's off the presses within the last 30 days that we want to share with you. And let's roll into our agenda for today. So we have 5 key areas that we're going to be speaking about. First, we're going to start with what's going on in the credit union landscape with regards to board succession and board development. Then we're going to break down board succession into different phases so you have a way to refer back to different phases for your organization. Then we'd like to share with you what other organizations are doing for common practices and best practices. We're going to give you a little bit of information on where credit unions are starting with succession planning and then how they're shifting into best practices so you can use that knowledge in your boardroom as well. So that'll come through with a lot of good case studies and examples. Lastly, you're going to have some nice takeaways. Here's how you build your own roadmap. Here's how you look at what's best for your board. And then how do you execute and implement a really good, high-performing board succession planning process. So we started this work many years ago. We did some research with a couple case studies, one particular Launch Federal Credit Union in Florida on what's going on in board development. So we used some academic research, some practical case studies, and again, execution and implementation that helped them get to a higher level of board development, succession planning, and ongoing learning. So we call that transformative change model. So it's very exciting. So we'll have some of that in the background here. We also have a paper written about the TCM for boards. So we'll link that to this webinar if you want to refer to that at any time. So now I'm going to give it up to Peter to go through the phases of board succession planning.
Yeah, thanks, Dee Dee. So we look at board succession planning not linearly, not as a step 1, 2, 3, 4 through 10. It's more cyclical in nature, right? And so we're going to talk you through this content today. So first we start with benchmarking. Where are we today? Then where do we want to go? Declaring the board of the future. It's easier to understand and declare what's important to us in the future if we understand where you are today. Then you start to say, all right, let's roadmap those priorities and action steps. We go to the market, we pull in that next level talent, and then we do onboarding and ongoing development, upskilling the portfolio skills that we have on the board. So we're going to talk through these different phases today, and you'll see different content will have overlapping reference points to each of these phases of board succession planning. But before we jump into the actual content, let's get a lay of the land. Where are we as a credit union industry? So this is the first time, as Dee Dee just said, hot off the presses, first time this data is being published that we have seen because we've been grinding out this data, building a data set here regarding director, CEO, and board succession positions and content. Okay, so first, high level. Okay, so 10 years ago, how many credit unions were there? We know this, right? Everyone knows 7,000-ish credit unions 10 years ago. And then if we fast forward here to, and this data has 2021, and then we also have some data sets here, Q1 2022, but it's about 5,000-ish credit unions. Okay, let's look at this from a percentage standpoint. Over on the left, you see these different, the smallest asset grouping as we have it on here, under 50 million. It's 55% of the credit unions in 2021 compared to the credit unions that were in 2013, half. But I want to point out here, as you look at every other asset grouping, the way that we've classified these asset groupings above 100 million has grown, right? They keep moving and growing and expanding over the last 10 years. So if we look at the count, and I'm just going to draw your attention to a couple of spots here. On the right side, so $2 to $5 billion organizations basically tripled, right? $5 to $10 billion organizations, it's almost tripled as well. And then from $10 billion plus, there was 4 organizations in 2013 that were at that asset class. Now there is 5 times that many, almost 20. So we're going to look at some of the numbers, and we want to understand the representation of these asset groups as we go through the data. I'm going to pick those pieces apart, okay? Board size. We get asked all the time, what's the ideal board size for an organization, or what's the most common? And we haven't seen any empirical data, and so this is the first time we're seeing this for all credit unions. We're going to slice and dice this a little bit. I want to unpack that word ideal though, because ideal depends on what your board objectives are. We're going to talk about board objectives later on. But you can see here all credit union boards for 2013, 2021, 7 and 9 are the most dominant. And then look at that 5. 5, actually, that surprised me. We've only seen a couple in our experience working with boards, only 5 board members. But what I want to show you here is if I take out the organizations that are under $100 million, look how the data changes. 7 and 9 really stand out. And that's what we're used to seeing here. Then we slice and dice it by charter type. So federally chartered credit unions here, 7 takes it. Number 9 is in the second position, most common board sizes. And then federally insured state chartered credit unions, basically the same, 7 and 9. But if you look over 10, 11, 12, 13, it's got a little bit more of a representation, but 7 and 9 really take the cake, right? And then private insurance, they're a little bit different. There's not as many of them out there, but it's important to look at the data here. So 6, 7, 8, 9, right? Those are the numbers as you can see them. How about organizations that are over $1 billion? And this surprised us as we looked at this. Look at that, number 9. That takes the first position, or the most common count of board size for organizations in the industry. What also surprised me was the prevalence of boards with over 13 or over board size. There are some boards we work with that are 13, and their objective is to get down to an operating 9. Right, because of what is important to them and their objectives. Now, we also get asked this a lot because in our CEO succession work and CEO executive search, well, how often are CEOs on the board? And so we pulled this data for all credit unions across this 10-year period from 2013 to 2022. The green here is about 1 in 10 from 10 years ago, and now it's about 1 in 8. So it's more prevalent slightly over the last 10 years. But let's look at it by asset groupings. And if you can see this picture, and the way I kind of see it is there's this arc here where the smaller organizations have it a little bit more prevalent and the larger organizations basically a little bit more prevalent 10 years ago. But let's look at it now. Those became more extreme. So the mid asset groupings we have here, 500 to $1 billion, least prevalent opportunities there for CEOs to be on the board. But as the organizations have been getting larger and larger, it is becoming more and more common. So about 1 in 5 of the largest organizations, or 1 in 10 of 2 to 5 billion. But what about charter type, right? So about 1 in 10 by different charter type 10 years ago. And now it's about 1 in 8. So it doesn't really matter what charter type you have. So that's something that is being asked for in our CEO searches. Dee Dee, wouldn't you ask this here? Where if a CEO is on the board of their current organization and then they're being recruited to another organization, and the board members are like, well, we don't have our CEO on the board. So it's a conversation, right?
It is a conversation, Peter, yes. So a lot of the external candidates will ask, is the current CEO going to stay on the board after they retire, or am I expected to be on the board? Those are 2 big questions they're asking.
And coming from a CEO that's been on the board to moving to an organization where they would not be on the board, that is a dynamic at play. That's something that boards are going to have to contend with and look at it. Here's the data to tell you where it is. All right, now we're going to look at gender representation of the board and CEO. And this is the first time we've seen any data that is hard about the whole industry as opposed to just sample size, okay? So we're going to unpack this data a little bit, like what are we talking about, how we went about it. So we sourced data from the NCUA profile reports, 2.5 million records. Oh God, it took a lot there. 11,000 different first names, okay? And so what that means is when we did the data slice, half the data can be represented by just 104 names. Okay, what do I mean by that? Here's what we did. We looked at it and we said, okay, John, in our experience, first person experience, first name John, that represents males in our life. James represents male. Mary represents female. So we just took this experience-based approach. But what the data is telling us here is those first 2 names, John and James, that represents almost 5% of the 2.5 million records. So just sit with that for a second, okay? And then the top 2 female names, Mary and Linda, 1.5% of the data. That's a lot of data. We actually went through basically 1,900 first names and said, hey, look, based on all of this, this is our experience, this is how they represent it, 92% of the data. And it's enough for us to take some action on it, to understand what's happening inside the industry, okay? So first, let's take a high level in terms of the directors. Overall, across the credit union industry for the last 10 years, and we took these as much as we could, gender neutral colors here, so black for unknown, right? Those 9,000 names that we didn't look at and decide are females orange and males are this tealish kind of color. So 10 years ago, just looking at the visualization of the chart, and then I'm going to give you the data here. So 10 years ago, 65%, or let's just call it 2/3 of the board of directors in all of the credit industry were male, right? And then 31% were female. And then today, it's about 1/3 of all director positions are female, and then 60% are male. But the increase in the unknowns, or the non-John and James and Mary and Linda names, is increasing there. We're going to look at it by different officer positions on the board, and the data will speak for itself. It'll tell a story, and we're going to ask you to look at it here. So the chair position, all credit unions, about 1 in 5, 10 years ago, were female, and that's largely the same today. Over a 10-year period, basically for all intents and purposes, it's largely unchanged. Then we're going to look at the vice chair position. So about 1 in 4 female, 7 in 10 were male 10 years ago. Now it's about 1 in 4, a little bit more than that today for female, and about 2/3 for male. And of course, there's that 7% and there's the rounding and all of these data here. So it's basically unchanged. Then the treasurer position, right? So it's a little bit different number there, 30% for female, about 2/3 for males, and then 30% today. So it's basically the same. But look at this. I'm just going to flip back and forth here just so you can see the visualization. You see the secretary, look at the orange there, or how prominent it is on here. This is the only position of all the officer positions of a board where the females have the majority. All the other positions, as you're seeing here, are held by male names here. So 52% from 10 years ago. Now it's dwindling down a little bit to 50%. So we just want you to sit there and just kind of take that information in. All right, and then we looked at this data and we said, all right, well, gosh, there's a lot of directors, and you know this, that hold at least 2 positions on the board. So it could be secretary and treasurer. It could be vice chair and also on the supervisory committee. Whatever it was, if they held at least 2 positions, what was their gender? And so it is a little bit more. There is more times than other positions besides the secretary where females have a representation of the data. How about the CEO and director? So there are, as we just talked about, CEOs that hold a director position on the board. So it's actually pretty close there in terms of equality or representation. They're about half. But what if we take out those organizations that are under 100 million? It is a very different story. About 1 in 5 10 years ago to now about 1 in 4. How about director gender by asset classes? Because all of those were for all the organizations that for the last size, any asset class on here. So we have across the spectrum 10 years ago, about 1 in 4-ish for basically everything on here. And then currently, about 28-30% in terms of this classification. Then chair gender 10 years ago, and just because it stands out here, remember there was only 4 credit unions that were north of 10 billion. There were no female chairs back then. Only 4 top opportunities, and none of them had it. Now there is 19 organizations, so basically about 1 in 4 of the chairs. But I'm just going to flip back and forth from these slides here, just so you can see it real in contrast here in terms of the leader of the board position, the gender representation, about 1 in 5. It is progressing, right? And by definition, meaning just more. But over a 10-year period, I would say it's marginal at best. That's my estimation or my assessment. The way I kind of think about it in terms of the change that's happening in our country, in our world, with gender equality and all of that, it's kind of like inflation. If inflation's at 5, 10, whatever percent, and change is only happening at 2%, we might be even falling behind in terms of the potential opportunity in credit unions. Okay, vice chair position here 10 years ago and now. So there's more prevalent female representation in the vice chair position than the chair position. Treasurer position, same thing here, making some marginal increases. And again, of course, secretary position, and they're making more ground in those roles. So that's a lot of information, right? So we wanted to give you that perspective from a wide lens about what is happening inside of the industry from a board position count, from a gender representation, from across the asset classes, et cetera. So now we're going to talk about benchmarking our current state inside of our organization.
Amazing data here, Peter. There's so much popping up for me right now, and my hope here is that as boards, they're taking this information in, and maybe that piece that you just went through could be shared in a board development session or executive session just to talk about it. What's going on with the market, and then start to look at their own organization. I think in terms of people advancing or organizations or teams advancing and boards advancing, it's like what's going on, pausing, taking that in, and then looking at ourselves. So here we go. So how do we benchmark our own organization, and so we can work towards alignment and performance? So what we want to do is move beyond our opinion and our assumptions into what truly is important to our board, and what are we aligned on, and what are we not aligned on. So if we move from anecdotal and opinions and thoughts into real information, then that stimulates what we call volition, energy, attention, and gains a commitment of the board. So this is definitely a process. So we're going to walk through this with you today. And I'm also going to say here is that when you start this board development work, you want to plan on about 12 to 18 months to walk through the different pieces, so let it sink in.
Because it's work.
It is work. It is work, and it's stimulating, it changes thinking, and it stirs us up a little bit. That's what we're hearing from credit unions.
But how can you have change if we don't get stirred up?
I hear you. So when you start this work, it should be with the commitment or the declaration that we are going to have best practices, high-performing practices in our boardroom. You don't know what those are yet for your boardroom. We can share those with you. We're doing that here today on what the other organizations are doing. But you don't want to go into this work just to go into it, because then it's not work. You want to go into this work saying, where are we? Where can we be? And that gets really exciting. So what we've done over the last few years is we've looked at what's governance and what are the different categories. So we segmented governance into these 8 categories, which are real exciting. So you can look at your own board and see where are we in these 8 areas of governance and which ones are most important to us. We're not going to get into a lot of it today on what the findings mean, but what we have found when we do this is that there's often what we call low-hanging fruit that comes out of this work. Like, oh, we should have done this before. We can cross this T, we can dot this I a little differently. But you're also going to find anywhere from 2 to 4 areas where you go, oh, we need to do the work, right? We need to secure the commitment and get the energy behind it. What do you want to say there, Peter?
Well, it is work, and that's why we highlighted it. And lots of times boards will say, gosh, all right, we're high performing, and we'll talk through this, and we need to address succession planning. But gosh, those are hard conversations, right? And where's a place to start? And so, as you said, it can take 18 months. And just briefly, a story, one client that I was working with, we started this work in April when I came back to them in June. And this is an anecdotal story, but it's a real story. 2 of the board members had passed away in those prior 2 months. Oh. And so the board was thankful we had started that work in April, but then they were saying, gosh, we should have started it earlier.
Yeah.
Right? And so it's work. And so we're going to give you some practical steps here and help you understand where do we look at alignment and performance.
Yeah, so we've taken some data out of board alignment research that we've done that represent 13 different credit unions in the last several months, and I think it was 141 different board members. So the way it works is each board member will get a link, they put their own information in there, and everything's confidential, of course, and then we consolidate the information. So we're pulling some pieces out here. We started with, what are the necessary skills? How are we doing in building the necessary skills, or making sure we have them on the board to represent the organization the best way possible, represent the membership. So on the far right here, you can see that dark blue. So 17% of board members who took this assessment say, yes, I strongly agree that we have identified the necessary skills and knowledge that must be represented on the board. And then another 40% say, I agree. So that's 57%. So we have a large number of people who say, I strongly agree and I agree, but then there's a lot of work that still needs to be done. So imagine what would be different if we identified what those skills are, which we're going to get to a little bit later. The next question most board members ask, or the conversation that comes up, is like, okay, we think we have a great board, but do we really represent the membership in certain ways of demographics and diversity? So you can see here the number's a little less here. So what do you want to say there, Peter?
Yeah, so it's, we've identifying the skills, we feel good about that, but what if, and even though we aggregated it as 13 different boards, and here this actual distribution of the representation of the responses is actually pretty typical to each one of those boards that we start with when we do this board succession planning. And so if all of us said, no, we have not done this, that's actually generating a certain kind of commitment and interest. Okay, go, we're on the same page. But if we have two board members strongly agree, two board members agree, and then we have two over here too, then we're not in a same starting position. And so this helps stimulate alignment and performance so that we can generate that commitment, that interest to do the work.
So this is about, board succession planning, and, we're going to show you some data here where there's a significant number of board members who say that they could probably roll off the board in the next 2 to 4 years. So being a researcher that I am, I'm going, well, how are we talking about the role of the board member? Do we have a decent or relevant or modern job description? So most boards will have a position description that was written 5 to 10 years ago. So if you're going out to do a CEO search, or a CEO's looking for a CFO, the whole landscape has changed. So you deserve it too, to update your documentation and refresh and modernize and be exciting in how you write these, because it will help you recruit and onboard the best people. So you can see that we have a lot of opportunity there as well. And then onboarding and mentoring, 26% say strongly agree and agree. So what we've done is what research we've done is like, well, what is your onboarding? Well, I get a tour of the building by the human resource officer or the CFO, or I get to look at these different financials, and bam, I'm ready to go. But we're also finding out in the interviews that we're doing that a lot of board members are saying, I don't think I can say anything for like 3 years, or it took me 4 years to feel like I could add value. And we don't have that time anymore. We need to figure out how to onboard high quality board members so they can add value the first meeting. What do you say there, Peter?
Well, this goes right into succession planning, and this is where, from our perspective, succession planning is not just, and hopefully you're getting a sense of this, when is someone going to roll off? Right? It's much broader. There's phases of it. It's dynamic. It's strategic.
Yeah.
Jinx. So here we are, right? So when we looked at this, we said, well, does your board have a succession plan for itself? And we want you to ask yourself, how would you respond to this, from a strongly agree to a strongly disagree? And the way that most researchers look at somewhat agree is kind of like, well, I don't want to say no, right? I mean, we have one or we don't. And so only 17% of directors feel strongly or agree that they have one. And so look at, there's that 1%. I just popped that 1%. 1%. So really, look at the dominance here. It's really in the disagree, or I don't even know if we have a succession plan.
Well, later, we're going to talk about it, but when we do talk to people, board members, their succession plan is, oh yeah, we have associate board members. They say that, but there's not a formal structure that is defensible and replicable. So that's what we want to talk about here today, is move beyond that. Thank you, Peter. All right, so also we want to look at is, how are we, if we're recruiting and onboarding the best board members, great. how are we creating an environment where all opinions are encouraged and explored? Now that goes beyond the chair saying, does anybody have anything to say here? And there's silence in the room. So we go, does silence mean everybody agrees or disagrees or we don't have a thought? The chair has to actually cultivate a culture of inquiry. We need to draw out, because sometimes, especially new board members, and I'll say people of color as well as minority women from the research that we've done, sometimes feel that their voice is not wanted. They feel like they're checking a box. So what we need to do is actually create an environment where everybody's stepping over each other and jinxing each other like Peter and I do. We do want to have that in the boardroom. So the board's job is really, really hard. The other piece here is board members in the minority support the majority decision when consensus cannot be achieved. So we see a significant number of strongly of agrees and strongly agree here. So that's great too. And then we also want to look at, is that maybe a little bit too much consensus? Yes, I kind of didn't agree, but I didn't say anything, but I'll support it. So we want to dig a little bit differently there, right, Peter?
Yeah, and what we're also trying to say in this content is, in the prior slides, board succession isn't a topic that's very thoroughly addressed, but yet board members feel mostly we can have hard conversations, but that's the conversation. We'll talk about some blind spots later on. This conversation isn't addressed as much, so it's just not put on the table, right? And that's where we want to talk through some of this content.
Yeah, so in the market, sometimes it's called a board inventory of skills or a board matrix. We're just saying these are components when you go out and benchmark current state. We like to do deeper dive than what I've seen in research, because sometimes the magic's in the nuggets. So each of these bullet points on here has other dimensions to it. So professional experience, we're going to get to that a little bit later, because that's also changed over the last 5 to 10 years. Employment status could be retired, part-time, full-time.
Gig workers.
Absolutely. Yeah. Formal education. So there's a lot here. So when you go to do, I'll say, benchmarking, these are the places that you want to look. And then we mine the data and we look at, how does this make sense for our board, our organization, and for our membership, most important. So there's a couple places here I think we need to pay attention to.
Yeah, so we're going to walk through two here. We're going to walk through two pieces. You can see all these, 12 or so bullet points. I'm going to unpack two of these. We're going to both unpack these two, just so you can see what the conversation could look like, and imagine if you addressed all of these. And again, this is why we want to stimulate that volition and secure the commitment to do the work, because you're going to see this is going to take work just by these two components, okay? These very actionable components. So a first place to start is, let's just look at the service commitment. What are the years of experience and service that our current board has had? And let's just look at it from a high level average. And so what we did is I took the averages for a couple of boards and changed the names to protect the innocent. You know the story. So we'll just look at averages and medians. And some boards, they want to say, hey, look, we don't want to dissect individuals here, put anyone on display. But I'm going to show you the difference of when we do that, right? When we look at averages and medians versus we look at actual individual directors. And so when we look at charts, and one of the things we teach in our strategy programs, you want the chart to tell the story for you. And right now, hopefully what you see in this chart is that the averages and medians do not actually tell the complexity of this story. We have 3 people that have been on over 3 decades, got a couple of people that are newish, right? And we worked with board members where I've only been on 7 years. I'm the newbie, right? I'm the newbie, right? And so I can't imagine ever saying that in a professional job, right? I know it's a volunteer, et cetera. But what we want to look at here too is, well, how long are you committed to being on the board? And that question is not often asked, but as you see, when we do this with boards, it gives very actionable information. So I'm going to ask you to look at this here, and you look at the securing the commitments. We've got a couple of people that are saying, yeah, 10 plus years, right? I'm here, I for what I can see, and I just timed it with my retirement. Yes, I can see it here, but gosh, look at this grouping here, and at the bottom even, there's another 4. Inside of a couple of years, the board dynamics will significantly change. And I'm asserting that Because when 2 people out of 7 are changing, that's a large portion of the team. I'm going to call the board a team. But what we also want to think about is, in addition to experience and perspective, they're leaving, right? There's perspective and expertises are leaving. So what we want to think about here, all right, let's take this in the succession planning, is that how the board recruits is going to change. When we have 2 people off, we have to add 2 people on. Those 2 people, how they were onboarded, their experience, hopefully gets to inform that perspective about the next best practices. But what we want to do is we want to have those conversations sooner, because we want to reduce friction. When people are leaving unanticipated, there is friction for the recruitment process. That's just every single time. When we have a plan and it's working and we're all bought into it, we're more aligned. And that's what helps us to go, well, where are we declaring the board of the future? We have to figure out, what do we want to be, and then and why do we want to be that, which then informs our how we're going to tackle that, so we can get aligned on that as well.
Yeah, thank you, Peter. Back to that piece about number of board members all leaving the board at the same time, that's really tough for a CEO. Really, really tough because new people may come on, go a different direction. So that's another dynamic and dilemma in terms of onboarding new board members. What kind of skills and talents do you need? So the thing that we're still fighting in the industry is status quo. So many times I hear, yes, we have a succession plan. I'm going to bring on my brother, or somebody knows somebody, or we have associate board members who, have been on for 6 months yet, but we don't have any board seats available for 6 years. So there's a lot in all that. So we're sharing with you what we hear is a business killer, because it is status quo. Lack of direction. There's not a purpose for the direction. The board's not doing their own work. We always ask boards, are you doing your own strategic planning session by yourself, creating a framework for you to be the highest performing? The other one is a focus on planning. And planning is basically working with known variables versus strategic and critical thinking, and that how do you execute on behalf of a high-performing board. And I want to distinguish that from executing what the CEO is supposed to execute, but how do you take your board purpose, strategically think about it, and then execute so you can stay high performer and even evolve more. There's risk, distaste for risk. We're afraid of it. But we also believe, Peter and I, with this work, and you're doing the benchmarking, you see what other credit unions are doing, you can ease into it. We said this is not an overnight, one and done kind of work. We're going, let's plan on 12 to 18 months. We accept mediocrity, but we might not think we're mediocre, but other people see us as mediocre. So this is kind of tough stuff to hear, but this is what we're seeing. Lack of knowledge and strategic skills aligned with competitive needs. We came on 15 years ago, that's our knowledge. Yes, we go to conferences, but not really learning. What is cybersecurity, right? What's cryptocurrency? What does fintech mean to us? Should we make or buy apps? All sorts of things. It's exciting to learn new things. I'd love to see more of this in board development plans. And then the one that really touches me near and dear is lack of accountability for performance. There's a little bit of like, I'm here, I'm a board member, I have this status, but I'm not accountable. So what we're seeing is very exciting is more boards actually putting in accountability practices through a process like this. So you might have a dialogue just on these 6 areas of status quo and see which ones ring a bell for your board.
And when we work with high-performing CEOs, they want to know how they're going to be held accountable.
Yeah.
They want to be held accountable. Any high-performing individual wants to know, what are the benchmarks, what are the stats, what are the goals, what are the milestones, how am I doing against those? And so if you're a high-performing board and there's not an accountability mechanism, we're going to talk more about this, it's difficult to judge high performance. High performance teams always have this.
Well, yeah, yesterday, in terms of status quo, we're looking at the agenda for the ALM First Institute, which is coming up here soon, and they have it every year, and they have a board track. I think it's real exciting because they're actually in board language, helping board members understand more about liquidity, the balance sheet and how to manage it, investment portfolio, the impact of rates. So I'm very excited about our clients going to that. So what I would say is, get to a point where you start to say, hey, status quo is not acceptable anymore. So let's just get off that freeway and let's start exploring. So what we also know in our work is that when I ask board members, what's the most important thing that you do as a board member, or what is the function of the board? What's the role of the board? Guess what they say? We approve and monitor policy. Oh my gosh, that is not so exciting at all. We really have three things. We have to be strategic and critical thinkers and be able to help and challenge the CEO. Yes, policies are really important, and guess what? There's probably a lot of policies in your board policy handbook that you don't even need to be touching. That's a place to look too. And another one is advocacy. How are you advocating on behalf of the member, behalf of the credit union industry, locally, regionally, and nationally? Like, get involved. Those are the three things. So when you're doing your position descriptions and you're creating onboarding, all of these things, these three things need to be integral into that documentation and that way of life on the board member, as a board member.
So hopefully we're stimulating, right, some compelling arguments to say, how do we go to the next level? Okay, we're going to give you some how action steps again, right? So we talked about the service commitment. Now we're going to talk about the functional domain of expertise. And so when we work with boards that are really trying to take it to the next level, we look at the portfolio of skills, both in an aggregated format as well as an individual format. I'm going to show you a couple of those here. We look at functional domain expertise, demonstrated and needed. And what that means is, what are the functional expertise's skills that are actually showing up in the boardroom? Now that's different than, hey, I have these skills in my back pocket and none of those skills are manifesting in words or actions or conversations in my mouth, right? So this is what we're saying. What am I seeing Dee show and demonstrate in the board? And then also, what do we need? And so we pulled from our list. We have about 30-something functional domain expertise, and just for the conversation today, I think there's about 12 on this list. And we asked board members to self-assess. Okay, well, what is your skill set here, right? How are you demonstrating this? And you can see you've got some numbers in here, and it's not really stacked ranked from the numbers, just more to put technology at the top, and it's alphabetized, but really because coincidentally, it's the lowest self-assessed skill that boards have in our data set, at least. And you can see on there that executive compensation and diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging both have the highest self-assessed skills on the board. But now let's look at how peers are assessing this. When we look at a board of 7 and they're assessing each other, and the average assessment they're offering each other is lower, largely, on all of these skills than we're self-assessing for ourselves. So you can see here the peer assessment 2.5 on a scale that we have, or for technology or legal, on average is low for most of the board members. But then, what do we need on the board? What's the benchmark? What are we trying to tackle in the next 3 years? And so what these colors are showing you is that the most widely assessed by this board for the future is we need technology skills. But you know what? We also, because we don't have an M&A strategy, we're not aggressive in that, we're not necessarily seeing that we have that need for that experience in the future, or legal, in an aggregate kind of format. So this is just an average way to, this is a portfolio way to look at for the skills. But we really encourage boards to look at by individual. And it's not always comfortable in the conversation to say, well, so my skills are going to be up there for people to see. Hey, we can make it anonymous, etc. But really, this is important to see, because I'm going to show you here, how many legal experts do we need on the board? How many accounting experts do we need on the board? One board I worked with, I think it was about 5 of the 7 were CPAs. So they had an overrepresentation of accounting skills, and the CEO really, wink, really enjoyed all those CPAs on the board. But what we want you to look at here, look at this leader 1 and 2, right? So they brought the accounting expertise and legal expertise to the conversation, right? And that makes sense. But if you remember from a few slides ago, these 2 individuals are going to be leaving in the next couple of years. Okay, so the immediate reaction may be, okay, so we need to bring an attorney on, right? We need to bring a CPA on. Okay, just so we can plug those holes that are leaving. But don't forget, we said that technology is the least demonstrated and most needed expertise. So what are we going to do here? We only have 2 slots that are going to be opening. This is going to be a great conversation. If we address this conversation, there's going to be some friction points. There's, and I've seen it. We need an attorney, and usually that's the attorney that's saying that. Or we need an accountant because the accountant's saying that. What do we really need on the board? What do we really want? And that's where we want that dialogue to unpack. We need time for that dialogue to unpack. And again, it's just a couple of slides, and hopefully you're starting to get stimulated. Some thoughts are getting stimulated.
Yeah, so let's take this into some practicality and talk a little bit about the nominating process at high level. So we get into some common practices and then best practices. So nominating committee is usually appointed by the chair, and you get to be on the nominating committee, or one of 3 typically on it, if you're not running for the board again, if it's not your turn to run again. So nothing scientific about it or strategic. So the process is, they email the directors, hey, do you want to run again? Are you re-upping? And then, the members vote. Oh, I'm going to vote for Dee Dee or Beth or Susan because she's been on there a long time, so I'm being very high level here. Everyone's happy. We repeat the cycle. We're not disrupting anything. So what I'm suggesting here is that we change things a little bit up here to best practices. Oh, yes, of course. It's a lifetime appointment like the Supreme Court. We have heard that so many times. I actually think some board members are board members longer than being on the Supreme Court, right?
I think that is. Yeah. It can be
especially
the
those
case.
Are like 50, 53 years old.
Yes.
Yeah, still invigorating, but yeah, it is like a lifetime appointment. All right, so best practices. So what I'm suggesting, and what Peter and I have been looking at is how about we shift the nominating committee big time and change it to a board development committee, which can be responsible for helping to benchmark what's going on here, look at what we need for the board moving forward, help decide and facilitate the conversation on what do we need in the board. What we also know, and we don't have the data for that today, but we're seeing it, is that when we get higher level strategic thinking skills and more modern areas of expertise like fintech, M&A, cybersecurity, that also challenges the CEO a little differently too than just a lot of accountants. All right, so that does open us up to new markets and new strategic opportunities as well. What we're also suggesting, which is a paradigm shift, is let's all reapply. Outside of credit unions, when organizations have a big change, sometimes they're asked to reapply for their job so we can see where we can all fit in this new organization. That's just one example. But if external candidates have to apply, why not directors reapply and go through the process too? Here's what I've learned. Here's what's on my resume in the last 3 years. Here's how I've supported the strategic dialogue in the boardroom. Bring some of that out there. So incumbents are assessed the same way as external talent.
That's the best practice we do in our search process,
Absolutely.
too, right? And
Absolutely.
I know you've heard this as well as I, where I had a CEO that was retiring, and they said, I'm not qualified for my job today in the same way that I was when I got the job, because the job and the requirement and the rigors and the complexity and all of that are just at another level. And so that's what we're saying. Just entertain the idea of a different way about going the nominating process.
Yeah, thank you. Another way that we're seeing help support board members rolling off or shifting or making space for new board members, the Emeritus program. So what we've looked at here is what are the parameters? So we all know that it's not a non-voting, it's a non-voting person on the board. yet they can still influence and advise. So you need to make sure whoever's in emeritus status is supportive in that kind of way in terms of advice and influence. It is a prestigious status for tenured board members or volunteers, right? And they have had significant contributions. So we suggest that you set up parameters. Just because somebody's been on the board for 3 years, you may or may not want them to be emeritus status. But if they've been on there 20, 25 years and they've had significant value contribution, you might consider that as well. So it does create a catalyst, a choice point for new board members coming on, right? There is a board, there is a budget for emeritus, so they can still sometimes go to conferences and travel. A year status, at the most 2 years, you only want 1 or 2, because it does take budget, right? So you have to have, takes money. So you have to be really careful how you're allocating funds there. So what we want to do is look at, how do we define a significant contribution? So you have to do some work there. It is ambiguous. There is a position description that you can create for this. So it creates a sense of meaning for the person. People want to add value. One of the things that we're seeing a lot here is that the emeritus status will take on onboarding new board members, be their coach, be their board buddy. They'll also provide strategic advice when needed. They'll be there because they might be a credit union historian and say, here's some risks that we had a long time ago that you might not know about, and here's how it could apply to the future. So there are some strong parameters we could put around there and some expectations. I believe it shouldn't just be a person that takes up space. Let's put some structure around it, some accountability there. All right, associate board member, we referred to that earlier. Very exciting. I get very excited about associate board member when done correctly. So we can go out and recruit. So you want to have a position description for an associate board member and lay out what the expectations are. The term is usually 1 to 2 years. So you want to bring on an associate board member that's going to lead lag. You got to be careful there. Like the example that you had there, 4 or 5 are going to roll off here in 2 to 4 years. You probably want a couple of associate board members coming on. Of course, they're non-voting, right? And they do bring fresh perspectives, set the expectation that their voice is going to be heard, right? And they have a lot of energy. Associate board members have a lot of energy. So one of the traps is if we don't turn over board members, we're going to lose the associate board member after a year, typically, max 2 years, because there's no turnover. So we've done all this training and they're going to leave. Now, is that okay or not okay? Great. It'd be great if they stayed and worked with us, but they're going to go back into the industry or into the community, and they're going to be a viable, high-performing board member somewhere else in the community, and that's going to help everything there. So what we're also saying is so some associate board members are not onboarded, but they had associate board member status. They just hung out. So we want to have that structure there as well. We do want to have a recruitment process. We're still seeing the old status quo. I know so-and-so, and they would want to be trained to be a board member. Again, we want to have a structured strategic recruitment process.
And this not properly onboarding an associate board member, we got this quote here, and we're putting things in quotes largely because we hear them, but this is how I was onboarded 20 years ago. This board member this associate board member that said this was a prestigious professor. It was up and coming, a lot of research. When we were doing the work, I was intimidated, like she's gonna school me in some kind of way in my own process. It was great. I love that kind of challenge. But that's what came out of her mouth was that someone else had said, hey, this is how I was onboarded 20 years ago. Be quiet, observe for the next couple of years. And let me tell you, she did not like being told, be quiet for a couple of years to learn the ropes. Nor should she. And I can't imagine what the intended response there, but that's what we're seeing. So it's a poor recruitment process. And we don't, and if that was a poor onboarding process, we want to yield high potentials, because if we don't, it undermines the succession commitments. And I just heard it from a director the other day at a conference I was at where, we did this before and it didn't work out, and so we're not going to do it again. Okay, maybe because you had one poor experience, it doesn't mean that it's going to be that way every single time before in the future. Yeah.
All right, thanks, Peter. Now, term limits, boy, that's a hot topic. I think you could have one or two conversations about this by itself. I would recommend that you do pro term limits, and then what do we need to be aware of? What are common traps about term limits? So you get both perspectives there. So they're still non-existent for the large part, and it does create a lot of angst in the boardroom. If I'm going to be rolling off the board after 24 years, and that's the only thing I have in my life, what am I going to do? So of course, I may not want term limits. So we support an embodied entrenchment, a propensity for status quo when we don't have term limits and we don't have turnover, unless you're highly accountable and challenged, and you're constantly learning. So there's both sides there. So what we're seeing is, as an alternative perspective, is that we, moving forward this slide here, there we go, thank you, is that we want to have a tool that supports the organization's current and future strategy. Where are we going? What kind of perspectives do we need there? And then what kind of representation on the board will help us move forward? So we're seeing that in some really good practices here. Some boards say three terms, so 9 years. There are some that will go out to 12 and 15 years. So that's something you really, really need to talk about it. We want to move beyond what we call the entrenchment and ROJ, retired on the job. You don't want to be that board member. So if you are going to stay on for a long, long time, get your development plan, do a lot of reading, be curious and be strategic and learn, keep learning a lot there. We can get into that another time. All right, so compensation, well, a lot of work's been going on that. I think what was paper we helped support research on was, 5 or 7 years ago, something like that, with a couple other organizations in the industry. So why not to compensate? It takes a lot of money to compensate boards and to get the process down. And it also can keep us on board. I don't want to lose that compensation, so I'm incentivized not to roll off. And then, there's a concern it takes away the spirit of the credit union and narrows the difference between banks and credit unions. So what we're suggesting here is that when we do compensate, and in conjunction with compensation, we have accountability, we have rich position descriptions, awesome onboarding, that the performance of the board does go up. So all of these things are in alignment with each other. We also see that the value that the board adds, and they're getting paid, the financial implication impact is mitigated. So they're actually improving financials in this research that we're seeing. We're also seeing a structure to release low performers. So you set a threshold for performance, and there are annual performance reviews by peers. So, and if I score lower than the threshold, then I've got 3 to 6 months to change my behavior and change how I show up on the board and get rescored and stay on the board. So overall, increased effectiveness. So I would say this is another conversation. Go both sides, against and in favor, and see where you land on there. If you are going to move into compensation, you have to have the structure before you start writing the check. You have to have the structure. We've talked a lot about that, but you have to have the accountability mechanisms before you actually implement the compensation. So peer-to-peer assessments, do the 360s, do the board assessments. You want to be able to make sure that there's board members are strategically inclined, that you have access to networks so you can bring on good board members. Right, and you want to be able to prove the return to member in terms of value creation, and what kind of financial performance do you want to see positively impact, and proactively manage the reputation risk. So if you are going to do this, there's some ways that you have to manage the press and be able to explain to the members, this is why we're doing this now. And if you do all this, appropriately and effectively, it'll work out, but you've got to have the framework there first.
And just to be clear, when boards do this, the conversations change.
Yep.
The sophistication of the strategic policy, advocacy, dialogue is fundamentally different.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Board agendas are 80% strategic. There's a great consent agenda, but you're also, in terms of accountability, you'll know if I've read the board packet before I've walked in the room, because I've put some questions in there. So there's a lot there in terms of self-governing the accountability. All right, so what we want to talk about is, just have the accountability standards there, right? And so if we don't have standards, we're going to keep the status quo and we're going to invite mediocrity, and it's going to frustrate the CEOs. So in terms of CEOs being excited about boards being compensated, they're kind of down the middle on that, aren't they, Peter? Some are going, I see no difference. Others going, great, because they're stepping up.
If they're going to have, all CEOs go, if they're going to add more value, sure.
Absolutely.
Why wouldn't they get that value, that ROI?
You also, when you're redoing the position description, including accountability, you're going to change and upgrade the chair and vice chair position descriptions. There's more on them. So yes, chairs and vice chairs are going to probably take home a bigger paycheck because there's going to be more work there. The accountability piece too is how many hours are you expected to dedicate to the board. We see anywhere from a minimum of 150 hours and up. So laying all that out ahead of time before you actually compensate, before you recruit, before you onboard.
In this slide, and it's leading into the next piece, just to be clear, this is not just for if you're going to compensate your board. These are accountability parameters or kind of guidelines. Think about just in general, right? The role of the chair and the vice chair are leaders on the board to help declare and enforce standards of performance. Even if you're just volunteers, you're there to perform as an individual in the room, setting policy, direction, strategy, etc.
Yeah, there's been some credit unions, Peter, who have gone down the path, let's explore compensation, put in all the accountability standards. They go, no, we're good.
We don't need it.
We don't need it. So, both.
All right, so how do we prioritize our actions, right? How do we develop a roadmap? And without the absence of a roadmap, it's hard to figure out exactly where you're going to go. Well, we want to do these 10 things. Well, it's good to go, well, what's number one? And then how does that inform number two, right? So we're going to talk through some of this content. So again, back to our research here with organizations. So these are your directors. This is you, your peers saying this content. Hey, clear policies and criteria for selecting new members. What we want you to say or think about after we just talk through all this content is, what if 75% of directors in this content said, strongly agree, right? What would be different in the boardroom? I'm satisfied with the process for how we nominate directors. So what if 75% were strongly agree? That would fundamentally be a different conversation. So these are benchmarks we want to get in the nomination process. We want to revamp that content. We are ensured that certain board members aren't dominating the conversation. Sometimes those board members that are going to be most impacted, potentially negatively, by a difference in nominating process are the most vocal. And so we just want to understand and mitigate that. Board members are careful to ensure that all people are active, voices are heard during discussions, board engages in difficult conversations and necessary. And we wanted to show this because you see how it becomes more strongly positive as it goes down. We can have difficult conversations. We want to encourage you to have difficult conversations about the nomination process. We haven't changed it, right? So that's an order of a priority in road mapping. Because the overall performance of the board is very effective. Look at that, look at these numbers here. 80% of directors feel that performance of the board is very effective. How do you measure that, right? How do you measure that? You've established your own goals and objectives. Not as many directors feel that they have objectives and priorities. So this is the roadmap. You want to decide what is right for you and as a board. Here's where to start and why.
Absolutely. So the next three slides, we've talked a bit about the pieces on the next three slides. So what we've got here, so you can take these slides and actually have some conversation with your board development committee, executive committee, the whole board. Like, if we're going to do this work, and by this work I mean board succession, board development, here's where to start and why. Do the discovery work, right? Do what we call a board alignment assessment. Use third parties. My favorite, commit 1 day a year for us right? And when could we do that, and what would the topic be, so we can learn together? Identify low-hanging fruit, and then look at what needs, the deep work there. So take this as a checklist. Then define, what are high-performing directors for you? So we borrowed from some credit unions. They go, high accountability. And again, define what accountability is. Meaningful contribution, right? Immediately. Then we want people who are hungry. They have the volition for continuing to learn and bring back information that's meaningful and relevant. And then they will ask relevant comments, not operational comments or questions that take us down the rabbit hole. Very strategic versus operational. So you could take these elements here and put them into a board assessment or survey as well. And then road mapping, what are the priorities, right? So yes, let's revamp our succession structure, nomination process. Let's have these conversations. What about term limits? What about compensation? What about emeritus? What about associate board members? And go pro and con, go to both to understand what your blind spots are there. And what assumptions are you making that maybe you're not verbalizing? Look at how you're getting trained or developed, not just little mini trainings from staff. That's great, but have training that's relevant to where you're going strategically. Constant reading. Peter's got a huge reading list. If you ever are hungry for anything, let him know. He'll give you access to some really provocative reading for board members. And then, you have smart people on your board. Why not use them to help, move the needle a bit there? Development plans. We like one-page simple development plans, and be careful to make sure you list what's the outcome. Why am I taking this time, this energy, and expense, and how am I going to be differently? And then there's also longer, more involved ones, a development plan. So you can start with a small one and continue to evolve it. If you want to develop subject matter expertise, or you want to develop your voice in the boardroom, you want to serve on committees. So it depends on the complexity of what your learning is there. So again, of useful onboarding, and you want it replicable and defensible. So the 3 slides are very important for where you can start. So we've done a lot of work here, and then let's move forward and go, yeah, we need some new board members. How do we do that? We often hear that boards go, oh, well, we just put it out there, and I have this assumption that nobody who's younger than 40 wants to be on the board, or people are busy. There are ways to get really, really good people here. So I'm just going to walk through a case study here. So we did some work with an organization, and they looked at where are they going strategically the next 5 or 10 years, and what's the experience that they need. So you can see the experience that they need here: finance, insurance, construction, technology, fintech, and security. And then on the other side, they go, okay, well, what kind of characteristics and competencies do we need? So you can see there's a long list there. And then what we want to do is, how do you intermingle these different pieces here and find quality board members? So then we took it further, and we helped create what we call a posting. Now you see postings out there, there's recruiters put postings out there, but what about a posting for your board? Now the neat thing is, if you do this work ahead of time and you create a posting that's provocative, you're going to get a ton of good candidates. So we're going to highlight some of these here, right, Peter? All right. So we highlighted here, we're going to move outside our legacy market, but we do want some people in our legacy market. We want diverse perspectives. We want and need executive level experience, right? Because they wanted executive level experience because it's becoming, they doubled in size, I think, in 3 or 4 years doing this kind of work. So things got pretty sophisticated. So they wanted people to come in and help to be able to meet and match the CEO and the CEO's team. They decided they wanted finance or insurance industry experience, right? And they really liked real estate, construction, or manufacturing industries. So you might think this is limiting, but it's not. When you look at it and you look at where they're mapping their branching strategy and where they're expanding outside of their legacy market and what they're looking at in terms of their membership is there as well. They also wanted a candidate with strong digital acumen, and you can see down here essential functions: As an active board member, you will be mentored in, and here's what's going to be in the onboarding package here, right? What's a strategy, vision, target. So they created a very nice, robust onboarding process as well.
And it sets the tone for accountabilities, right? Right here, this is your objective is to understand the strategic vision and targets, proactively participate, et cetera. And I can already hear, some organizations that you might be looking at this and going, well, we don't need real estate and construction for our board. We're just showing you a case study, an example, a way to articulate how you would go to the market because you've done the work.
We want to move beyond our black book. We want to reach out to new people and create a posting, a writing, a narrative that they can lean into. And gosh, I'm trying to remember. I think they had up to a couple hundred candidates apply, and it was a hard decision to bring on the 2 they needed the first time and the 3 they needed the next time. So here we go. You don't have to be a member of the credit union anymore to be a good board member. So take that off your list of needed expertise or requirements, because they can become a member anytime. So you want to bring people in and you want to increase your membership. That's one way to do it. So you've done your work. You know what you want. You've written your posting, and here you just go. You go to market. This is another list. Refresh your position descriptions. Use social media. Expect that you're going to have tons of applicants. So you have to have a framework to manage that. You can use a third-party search consultant, or you've got to have somebody on the board who can manage all of this, and I strongly advise against that. What you want to do, board members, you want to focus on the top candidates and ask them really good questions, right? You want to focus on making that decision, not sorted resumes. That's not what you're there for. So here's a way to go to market, and this is a checklist that you can use as well. All right, and Peter talked earlier about onboarding and upskilling. I'm going to give it back to you, Peter.
Yeah, thanks, Dee Dee. So here we go. We got people on board. Well, how is our onboarding program, and how about our training? And remember, we talked about that earlier. The mini trainings are great, don't get me wrong. What if, and this is the questions we want to ask you, or we want you to contemplate, what if 75% of the board strongly agreed, hey, these are increasing our overall effectiveness? That would be great. And so the trainings, you're already doing them great. I mean, this is a self-selected audience too, right? And that's watching this webinar. You're in the game of training and development. So common practices for onboarding, right? This is where we're after. Here's the expectations, right? We want to make sure that we're saying, hey, look, the common practices we've already kind of hitting this here. They're remedial, they're ineffective. Pay attention for the first couple of years. Dee Dee said, right, do the tour of the headquarters, go to a branch, greet some people, etc. We've heard people say, hey, it takes 3 years really to be fully onboarded and understand dynamics in the boardroom. That's really a long time. It's too long. Let me just say that it's too long. What if we had people that were onboarded, ready to go, highly effective inside of 6 months, right? So here's best practices. I'm not going to list everything on here. You can pause and look at this. But there are, hey, look, as a board member, here's the content. And let me tell you, when new board members get this, they realize, oh, wow, this is a real deal. I got to bring my A game. And that's what we want to produce. We want to produce that sentiment. If we're not emailing this content, we're not showing them and walking through all this content with them, and here's the timeline, here's how to do that, they might actually have the feeling, gosh, what did I get myself into? What's the expectations, right? These are the responsibilities of new board members, right? Work through this content.
Ahead of time.
Yeah,
so if you think you're going to have some board members roll off in the next 2 or 3 years, let's start this right now.
Absolutely.
And because the earlier you start the conversation, the better the outcome is. So this is a nice little checklist for you.
And then here's some again, impacts when there's self-accountability, right? There is rigorous onboarding. They're ready to access resources. And we got some links. So you can click inside the content to excellent NAFQ links. We give this to our clients as well, right? Hey, this is how you can do this. Give them a roadmap. Give them the development button. Give them the template and say, hey, this is the development plan that we're all working, and here's one for yourself and an experienced board member or maybe an emeritus board member. The chair, vice chair are going to walk you through this content, and the CEO. Essentially, structure increases the likelihood that they're going to contribute value sooner. The absence of it is the counter, right? So ongoing training and development, training is not just for the new board members, right? We already talked about this earlier. The dynamics in the industry are changing. We have to stay ahead. We got to get sharper. We have never heard a board member say, my job is going to get easier as a board member as time goes on. I've never heard that before, right? So we have to stay sharp with our skills. And so we want to have a board development committee. That's what Dee Dee said earlier, as opposed to nominating committee, where we shift it, reframe it. We think it more cyclical and iterative in nature. Board development. You're looking at these skills and you're expecting individual learning. It helps the accountability conversation from under the premise of development, as opposed to accountability wagging a finger. These are the expectations so that you can increase your impact. No one's perfect. I'm not perfect. I need to get better. I have my own development plan. We're working these things, and it focuses my attention and efforts. Blind spots. All right, these are things that we hear all the time. Whenever we start an education session inside an organization about board development, recruitment, succession, first thing is I get someone raise their hand. Oh, you know what, Peter? No one wants to volunteer these days. And that's a very, very, very broad, and I'm going to say ungrounded, short-sighted assessment, right? Well, we want to find the most qualified candidates. We hear that, and actually we heard that when we were giving a speech at a conference one time, because we were talking about diversity. Well, no, our objective should be to find the most qualified candidates, and what was underneath that person's sentiment is that somehow a diverse candidate is not also the most qualified, technically, proficiency-wise. And those things are not mutually exclusive. We have to, you said earlier, Dee Dee, expand our go beyond our black book. We have to find people that are different than us. Here's the reason why. It's not to check the box for diversity. The reason why we need diverse experiences and perspectives, demographics, all of these things is because better conversations occur when we have diversity of opinions in the room. The research says we become more strategic when there are more diverse perspectives. If there are 3 Peters in the room, gosh, that would drive people nuts, but we'd have the same orientation. 2 of us wouldn't be needed. That's the idea. And then we had this quote earlier, it's a lifetime appointment. That's a blind spot. We don't want that. I hear from board members, I'll stay on the board until I realize it's not the best thing for the membership. Well, how do I measure that? How do you measure? We need some mechanisms in place. And I like to think I'm pretty great at my job, but someday someone's going to be better than me. I love that. I would celebrate that. I want people better than me. That's why we train our teams. They're supposed to be better than me. And we have a team, people who are better than me, better than us at different skills. That's what we want. Recruiting for a director, that costs too much money. Okay, what we want you to consider is what's the cost of bringing on someone that's the wrong director. There's hard costs, there's opportunity costs. What's the headache? How do you measure how many ibuprofens you have to take when you have the wrong board member? Just ask your CEO, how much would that cost us, right? What do you want to say?
Yeah, I know we're going to wrap up here, Peter, and I think I want to expand a little bit on that comment I made about the Black Book. It is just really a pipeline of candidates or people that we want to talk to see if they would be a candidate. And we meet people, all the time. We do that in our search business, and we're at a conference right now. It's just like, who do we want to talk with? Who resonates well with the organization? And it's okay to keep a pipeline and write those names down. So just wanted to reframe that a little bit.
Yeah, no, that's good. Okay. Yeah, always recruiting. We're always looking for that. Yeah, you don't want to just recruit when you have a position open. And what if we had 5 well-qualified candidates and we only had 2 positions? Hey, those next 3, we can take them, right? And the next time we have a succession. So here's the phases of board succession planning. Again, you start with benchmarking. Where are we today, right? Where do we want to go in the future? How do we roadmap and put these things together from a priority standpoint? And then we go to the market, and then we keep that development ongoing, not just for the new directors, but for all of us.
Exciting.
Yeah, there's the list of benchmarking current state components. Again, we looked at just the service commitment and portfolio. We touched on a couple of these other pieces here. Hopefully, we're giving you what you need to start a really great conversation and take some informed actions. If you want more access to tools, you can click this here. We got on our website 10 tools for increasing board performance. Also on the NAFQ site, there's some podcasts and educational articles about board alignment and the impact to it, and how to work towards a board organizing principle. We thank you for your time today. Appreciate you taking the time to dedicate your own board succession conversation.
Yeah, thank you very much. Enjoyed being here with you today. And if you want to have all or part of this in an education session, give us a call and hit rewind many times on this one. So thank you so much.